Hello, English learners. Welcome back to Daily English Talks. I'm Mia, and I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're diving into something truly powerful. 177 advanced English phrases that will boost your speaking skills, help you sound more natural, and take your confidence to a whole new level. These aren't just fancy expressions. They're phrases that real native speakers use every single day. In conversations at work, in casual chats with friends, or when expressing feelings, opinions, and ideas clearly and fluently. We'll go through these phrases in a relaxed and simple way. I'll also give you practice examples so you can feel how they work in real situations. So get comfortable, grab a notebook if you'd like, and let's get started with your English upgrade journey. Imagine you're at a coffee shop, and your friend asks how your week's been. You could say, "It was okay." But if you want to sound more advanced, try saying, "It's been a bit of a roller coaster." That phrase, "a bit of a roller coaster," means that your week had ups and downs. It's more colorful and real than just saying, "okay." You can also say something like, "Things got a little out of hand," if you mean things got a bit crazy or hard to control. Try using that the next time you talk about a busy day. Here's a small exercise. Think about your week and try to describe it using an advanced phrase like, "a bit of a roller coaster," or "things got out of hand." Say it out loud, repeat it, own it. Now let's say you're at work and your boss gives you too many tasks at once. Instead of saying, "I'm very busy," you can say, "I'm swamped." This is a very natural, native way to express being extremely busy. You might also hear someone say, "I've got a lot on my plate." These phrases are more expressive, and they tell people exactly how you feel. Try this. Imagine someone asks you, "Can you help me with this project today?" Your response could be, "I'd love to, but I'm swamped right now. Maybe tomorrow?" That sounds so much better than a plain, "I'm busy." Let's explore emotions. Saying "I'm happy" is simple. But what if you want to sound more advanced? Try, "I'm over the moon." It means you're extremely happy. Another one is, "I'm on cloud nine." If you just got a promotion or passed an exam, you could say, "I'm absolutely over the moon right now." Practice that phrase now. Say it with a smile. Try to link it to a happy moment in your life. That way, the phrase becomes more personal and memorable. Sometimes we need to describe when things didn't go well. Maybe you had an interview that didn't go your way. Instead of saying, "It didn't go well," try, "It went south," or "It fell flat." These are useful expressions for describing failure or disappointment. For example, "I thought the meeting would go well, but it really went south." Or, "My joke completely fell flat." Can you think of a situation where things didn't go as planned? Try to describe it using these phrases. In conversations, we also need phrases to express agreement or understanding. Instead of just saying, "I understand," you can say, "I see where you're coming from." Or if you agree completely, you might say, "I couldn't agree more." Here's a dialogue example. "I think we should wait a bit before making that decision." "You're right." "I couldn't agree more." Practice using this the next time someone shares an opinion you agree with. You may also hear people say, "Let's play it by ear." This means to not make a fixed plan and see how things go. It's a flexible approach to situations. For instance, if someone asks, What time should we meet up tomorrow? You might say, I'm not sure yet. Let's play it by ear. Try to use that phrase when making weekend plans or hanging out with friends. Now, sometimes we want to politely disagree or offer a different point of view. Instead of saying, you're wrong, a more advanced and polite way would be, I see your point, but, or, that's a valid point, but have you considered? These phrases keep conversations respectful and open. Try saying this. That's a valid point, but I think we should also consider the budget. It's great for work discussions or academic settings. When it comes to making decisions, you can say things like, let's weigh our options, or we're at a crossroads. If you're struggling with a tough choice, you might say, I'm torn between two options. Practice describing a personal decision using these phrases. For example, I'm torn between taking the job in New York or staying closer to my family. Let's talk about expressions for surprise. Instead of I'm surprised, you could say, that caught me off guard. Or, I wasn't expecting that at all. For example, her resignation really caught me off guard. Practice that now. Think of a moment that shocked you. Use that phrase to describe it. You may also want to express relief. Instead of saying, I'm relieved, you could say, that's a load off my mind. If you were worried about a test and then you found out you passed, you could say, phew, that's a load off my mind. It's such a real way to show how stress just disappeared. Say that out loud right now. Feel the relief in your voice. When you want to describe someone who's very helpful, instead of saying he's helpful, say, he really went out of his way to help me. That adds emotion and depth. Try this example. She went out of her way to make sure I got home safely. Think of someone who helped you recently. Try to describe what they did using that phrase. And when something happens unexpectedly, but in a good way, try saying, that was a pleasant surprise. Maybe a friend bought you lunch out of the blue. You can say, wow, that was such a pleasant surprise. Practice that now. Think of a moment like that, and say the phrase with a smile. Sometimes you need to tell someone to relax, or not worry too much. A casual and advanced way to say that is, don't sweat it. For example, if your friend apologizes for being late, you could say, it's okay, don't sweat it. Another phrase is, no big deal. These phrases help you sound more easygoing and understanding. Imagine this situation. Your colleague forgets to send you a file and apologizes. You reply, it's no big deal, just send it when you can. These phrases keep conversations friendly and low pressure. Let's say you want to explain that something is very easy. Instead of saying it's easy, you could say, it's a piece of cake. For example, the test was a piece of cake. Or, if someone is worried about using a new app, you might say, don't worry, it's a piece of cake once you get the hang of it. Try using that in your daily conversations. When talking about tasks that aren't difficult, these small expressions make your English sound a lot more natural. When someone is being very honest, especially about something difficult, you can say, he didn't sugarcoat it. This means he spoke directly and truthfully, without trying to make it sound better than it was. For example, my teacher didn't sugarcoat my performance. She told me I need to work harder. It's a good phrase when discussing feedback, criticism, or difficult truths. Practice using it by thinking of a time someone was brutally honest with you. We also need phrases to describe when someone avoids a question. Instead of saying, "he didn't answer," you could say, "he beat around the bush." This phrase means someone is avoiding the main topic. Example: I asked if he was coming to the meeting, but he just beat around the bush. Think of someone who avoids direct answers, and practice describing that situation with this phrase. There are times when you want to say someone is pretending or being fake. A great phrase for that is, "he's putting on a show," or "she's wearing a mask." These phrases help you describe behavior that feels inauthentic. For example, "he pretended to be okay, but it was clear he was just putting on a show." Practice using this by imagining a scenario where someone acts differently than how they truly feel. Now let's talk about expressing annoyance. Instead of saying, "I'm annoyed," try, "it's driving me crazy," or "it's getting on my nerves." For example, "the noise from the construction is driving me crazy." These expressions are very common in everyday English. Try using them to describe small, daily frustrations. Think of something that irritates you, and use one of these phrases to express it. Sometimes things don't go exactly as expected. In those moments, a good phrase is, "It's not the end of the world." It's a comforting way to say, "It's okay, we'll get through this." For instance, if your friend fails a driving test, you might say, "I know it's disappointing, but it's not the end of the world. You can try again next week." Practice offering comfort to someone with this kind of encouraging phrase. Let's explore how to talk about making mistakes. Rather than saying, "I made a mistake," a more advanced way is, "I messed up." Another option is, "I dropped the ball," which is often used in work situations. For example, "I dropped the ball on that project deadline. I'll fix it." These phrases make your English more relatable and modern. Try describing a recent mistake using one of these phrases to build fluency. If someone is doing something the wrong way, and you want to give a gentle warning, you might say, "You're barking up the wrong tree." This phrase means someone is misunderstanding the situation or blaming the wrong person. Here's an example. If you think I'm the one who told the manager, you're barking up the wrong tree. It's useful for clearing up confusion. Think of a time someone misunderstood you, and try using this phrase to describe it. Now, there are moments when someone is very lucky, especially when they escape a problem. In that case, you can say, "He dodged a bullet." This phrase means someone narrowly avoided a bad situation. For instance, "I was about to invest in that company, but then it collapsed. I really dodged a bullet." Try to connect this to a real experience of yours to help the phrase stick. Another great one for describing failure that teaches you something is, "It was a blessing in disguise." This means something that seemed bad at first turned out to be good. For example, "Losing that job was a blessing in disguise. It pushed me to start my own business." This is a perfect example of how English expressions add depth to your storytelling. Practice using this phrase by thinking of something that first felt negative, but ended up positive. There's also a phrase for when you have a fresh start. You can say, "I turned over a new leaf." It's used when someone decides to change for the better. For example, He stopped drinking and turned over a new leaf. It's motivational and great for self-improvement conversations. Think of a time you made a positive change and describe it using this expression. When someone is very nervous or scared, you can say, "He's shaking like a leaf," or "She's on edge." For example, "Before the interview, I was shaking like a leaf." Try saying this phrase out loud to express nervousness more vividly. Practice makes these phrases easier to use naturally. Sometimes we want to say someone is very confident. You could say, "He walks in like he owns the place." This phrase describes someone acting with a lot of confidence, sometimes too much. For instance, "He just walked in like he owned the place and started giving orders." Use this when describing bold or arrogant behavior. Practice saying it with the right tone to capture its attitude. Lastly, for this section, when someone is quick to get angry, you can say, "He has a short fuse." This means someone gets angry easily. For example, "Be careful what you say around him. He has a short fuse." Try using this when describing someone's temperament. This kind of expression makes your English more descriptive and engaging. When you want to express that something is easy to understand or obvious, a useful phrase is, "It's a no-brainer." For example, if someone asks whether they should take a free vacation, you might say, "Come on, it's a no-brainer. Of course you should go." This phrase is perfect for situations where the choice is clear. Practice it by thinking of a situation where the answer was super obvious and try using the phrase out loud. Now, imagine a moment when you're trying to stay calm in a stressful situation. A great expression for that is, "Keep your cool." For example, even though the client was yelling, she kept her cool. This phrase shows self-control under pressure. Practice saying, "I always try to keep my cool when things get intense." It's especially useful in work environments or any high-stress moments. If something happens rarely, you can say, "Once in a blue moon." This is much more colorful than just saying rarely. For example, "We only see each other once in a blue moon." Or, "He cooks dinner once in a blue moon." Try thinking of an activity you rarely do and describe it using this phrase. It helps you sound fluent and expressive. Sometimes people change their opinion or decision. Instead of saying, "He changed his mind," a more advanced phrase is, "He did a 180." It means a complete turnaround in thinking or behavior. For example, "He was against the plan at first, but then he did a 180 and supported it completely." Practice this by thinking of a time when someone made a complete change in attitude. There are also phrases to describe someone who's hiding something. A good one is, "He's keeping something under wraps." That means he's keeping it secret. For example, "They're keeping their engagement under wraps for now." Another is, "He's playing his cards close to his chest," which also means being careful about sharing information. Try these phrases when talking about secrets or private decisions. To talk about something that is very expensive, instead of saying, "It's very expensive," try, "It cost an arm and a leg." For example, "That designer bag cost an arm and a leg." It's a fun and common phrase that native speakers use. Practice this with things you've bought or seen that are just way too pricey. Now, let's look at a phrase for trying something new without much planning. You can say, "I'm going to wing it." For example, I didn't prepare a speech, so I'll just wing it. It means to do something without preparation. Think of a moment when you had to improvise or do something on the spot. Practice saying, I had no plan, so I just winged it. If someone is being too proud or arrogant, you might say, he's full of himself. For example, ever since he got that promotion, he's been so full of himself. It's a very conversational phrase, useful in both casual and work settings. Try describing someone you know who acts that way, using this phrase naturally. When someone is very kind and generous, you can say, she has a heart of gold. For example, she volunteers every weekend. She really has a heart of gold. This is a warm phrase that adds a lot of emotion to how you describe others. Think of someone kind in your life and practice saying, he or she has a heart of gold. There are also ways to describe when you feel uncertain or worried. Instead of saying, I'm worried, try saying, I have a bad feeling about this, or I'm getting cold feet. That last one is especially used when someone is nervous before a big commitment, like getting married or starting a new job. For example, he got cold feet before the wedding. Try describing a big decision you hesitated on using these expressions. Sometimes someone tries to avoid responsibility. A phrase for this is, he passed the buck. That means shifting the blame or responsibility to someone else. For example, instead of fixing the issue, he just passed the buck to his assistant. Try this by imagining a workplace scenario where someone avoided taking ownership. Now, let's talk about being realistic. A phrase like, let's face it, is often used before stating an uncomfortable truth. For example, let's face it, we're not going to finish this on time. Another is, at the end of the day, which means after everything has been considered. For example, at the end of the day, we have to do what's best for the team. These phrases are common in discussions and decision-making. Practice them in sentences out loud. When someone ruins a good situation, we say, he threw a wrench in the works. That means they caused a problem that disrupted everything. For example, we were ready to launch, but then legal threw a wrench in the works. Practice by describing a plan that got interrupted using this phrase. It adds vivid imagery to your story. A good phrase for when someone avoids telling the full truth is, he's beating around the bush. For example, stop beating around the bush and tell me what really happened. It's especially useful in personal conversations. Try practicing this with a firm tone to feel the expression better. If you want to encourage someone, instead of saying, don't give up, say, hang in there, or keep your chin up. These are supportive, kind phrases that native speakers use when someone is struggling. Example, I know it's tough, but hang in there. Things will get better. Practice saying this with real emotion. It's a great phrase for empathy and support. Another useful phrase is, let's call it a day. It means to stop working, especially after a long session. Example, we've done enough for now, let's call it a day. It's helpful for both professional and casual settings. Say it out loud now and think of times when you wrap things up. If something is very boring or uninteresting, you might hear, it's as dull as dishwater. For example, that lecture was as dull as dishwater. It's a great phrase for expressing boredom. Think of something dull and practice describing it with that phrase. Sometimes you want to talk about something that's uncertain or unlikely. A useful phrase is, "It's up in the air." For example, "Our travel plans are still up in the air." Practice this by describing something in your life that hasn't been decided yet. Lastly, for this section, when someone gives you some new information or news, you can respond with, "That's news to me." It shows surprise or that you didn't know something. For example, "He's quitting? That's news to me." Try this with a surprised tone and connect it to a real-life situation for better learning. Sometimes in English, when we want to say someone is not paying attention or is daydreaming, we use the phrase, "He's in his own little world." For example, "I tried talking to him during the meeting, but he was in his own little world." It's a casual and descriptive way to say someone isn't mentally present. Try thinking of someone who tends to zone out and describe it using this phrase. Another useful expression is, "I'm in over my head." This means you're dealing with something too difficult or overwhelming. For example, "I thought I could handle the project, but I'm in over my head." It's often used at work or when learning something new. Practice this by imagining you're learning a new skill and suddenly realize it's more than you can manage. When someone is trying to avoid taking a side in an argument, you can say they're sitting on the fence. For example, "She won't say whether she supports the plan. She's still sitting on the fence." This phrase is helpful for describing indecision. Practice using it by thinking of a moment when someone around you couldn't make up their mind. If something happens at the perfect time, not too early and not too late, you can say, "It happened just in the nick of time." For example, "We caught the train in the nick of time." This expression adds excitement to your storytelling. Practice it with an example from your own life, where timing was crucial. To talk about someone who is overly optimistic or unrealistic, you might say, "He has his head in the clouds." For instance, "He keeps talking about becoming a millionaire overnight. He's got his head in the clouds." Practice this by describing someone who dreams big without being practical. When someone starts something very energetically, we say, "He hit the ground running." It's often used to describe someone who begins a job or task with immediate energy and success. For example, "She joined the team and hit the ground running." Think of someone you know who jumps into action quickly and describe them with this phrase. There's also the phrase, "cut to the chase." It means to skip the unnecessary parts and get to the main point. For example, "We don't have much time, so let's cut to the chase." It's perfect for meetings or conversations where you want to be direct. Try using this when practicing how to lead a conversation or presentation. When someone is starting to show signs of stress, you might say, "He's cracking under pressure." For example, "With all the deadlines, he's starting to crack under pressure." This is a vivid way to talk about stress or burnout. Practice this phrase by imagining a stressful situation and describing how someone reacted. To describe someone who never gives up, you can say, "He's a go-getter," or "She doesn't take no for an answer." These phrases describe determined and proactive people. For example, "He's a real go-getter. He always finds a way to succeed." Practice describing yourself or someone you admire, using one of these expressions. Another great phrase is, "He's not pulling his weight. which means someone isn't doing their fair share of work. For example, the whole team is working hard, but John's not pulling his weight. It's common in team or work settings. Try this phrase when discussing teamwork or group responsibilities. If you want to describe someone who is very reliable, you can say, "He's solid as a rock." For example, no matter how tough things get, she's solid as a rock. This phrase shows strong emotional or professional reliability. Practice saying this about someone who has supported you in hard times. We also use the phrase, "The ball is in your court," when it's someone else's turn to make a decision or take action. For example, "I have done my part. Now the ball is in your court." Try saying this to describe a situation where you're waiting on someone else to decide. A very common expression is, "Don't jump the gun." It means don't act too early or without thinking. For example, "We need more information before we decide. Let's not jump the gun." It's useful for decision-making or planning conversations. Practice it in situations where timing is important. When you want to talk about someone who's very generous with their time or resources, you can say, "He gives freely of his time," or "She always goes the extra mile." For example, "She goes the extra mile to help her students." Try describing a helpful person you know, using one of these expressions. If something is certain to happen, we say, "It's a done deal." For example, "They signed the contract." It's a done deal. It's used when something is final and no longer up for discussion. Try using this phrase to talk about something that's already settled or confirmed. When someone gives up too easily, we say, "He threw in the towel." For example, after a few failed attempts, "He threw in the towel." It comes from boxing, where throwing in the towel means surrendering. Think of a moment someone gave up and try using this phrase to describe it. Another useful one is "out of the blue," which means something happened unexpectedly. For example, "He called me out of the blue after years of no contact." It's great for storytelling and surprises. Practice saying it while recalling a moment that caught you off guard. To describe someone who never shows emotion or stays very calm, say, "He has a poker face." For example, "Even during the bad news, she kept a poker face." It's perfect for formal or strategic situations. Try this phrase by acting out a scenario where someone hides their true feelings. When something is very simple or basic, we say, "It's not rocket science." For example, "Just follow the instructions." It's not rocket science. It's a humorous way to say something isn't hard. Try this when talking about something others tend to overcomplicate. A phrase to describe when someone is in control of a situation is, "He's calling the shots." For example, "In that team, she's the one calling the shots." Use this in business or social situations where one person has authority. Practice this with real-life examples from work or leadership situations. Sometimes when you feel really tired or exhausted, a useful phrase to use is, "I'm running on fumes." This means you're barely functioning because of how tired you are. For example, "I stayed up all night working, and now I'm just running on fumes." Practice this by thinking of a time you had very little sleep but had to keep going. Say it out loud, "I'm running on fumes." Another phrase to describe intense effort is, "He gave it his all." It means someone tried as hard as they could. For example, She didn't win the race, but she gave it her all. It's a great phrase for sports, exams, or personal challenges. Practice describing a time you tried your best using this phrase. Let's say you want to describe someone who has stopped caring or trying. A useful phrase is, he's thrown in the towel, which we've covered before. Another one is, she's checked out, meaning she's mentally or emotionally no longer involved. For instance, ever since the breakup, he's completely checked out of work. Try describing a situation where someone lost interest or motivation using this kind of phrase. When someone exaggerates a situation, we say, he's making a mountain out of a molehill. It means making a big deal out of something small. For example, it was just a small scratch, but he acted like the car was totaled. He really made a mountain out of a molehill. Try using that phrase to describe someone who overreacts to minor problems. We also use, he's blowing things out of proportion in a similar way. Practice this by recalling a recent time someone overreacted, and say it using this expression. It helps you sound more fluent and natural in emotionally intense conversations. Sometimes when people are very straightforward, we say, he calls it like he sees it. It means he's honest, even if it's uncomfortable. For example, you may not like his feedback, but he calls it like he sees it. This phrase is especially useful when talking about people who are direct and unfiltered. Think about someone like that and describe them using this phrase. Another expression for someone who reacts strongly or emotionally is, she flew off the handle. That means someone lost their temper quickly. For example, he forgot her birthday and she just flew off the handle. Try practicing this with a sentence about a time when someone got very angry all of a sudden. To describe something that happens rarely but is very special, we use, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. For instance, traveling to space is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Try practicing this phrase with your biggest dreams. Say, for me, performing on a big stage would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If something is extremely funny, instead of just saying, it's very funny, try, it cracked me up. For example, his joke totally cracked me up. It adds a lot of energy and realism to your reaction. Practice laughing and saying, that cracked me up. Think of something that recently made you laugh and use the phrase to describe it. There's also the expression, he's a tough nut to crack. That means someone who is difficult to understand or get close to. For example, he doesn't talk much. He's a tough nut to crack. Think of someone who's mysterious or guarded and use that phrase to describe them. To talk about gossip or sharing secrets, you can say, spill the beans. For instance, come on, spill the beans. What did he say? It's a playful and common phrase, especially among friends. Practice using it by imagining a friend who has juicy news to tell you. Say, don't hold back, spill the beans. A good one for discovering something unexpectedly is, it came to light. For example, the truth finally came to light during the investigation. It's a formal but useful phrase for work, news, or serious discussions. Try using it by describing a hidden detail that was revealed over time. When you want to express that someone is avoiding responsibility, you can say, he's passing the buck, as we've already seen, or he's shifting the blame. Both mean not accepting responsibility. For example, instead of apologizing, she just shifted the blame. Try this phrase by describing a moment at work or school when someone avoided accountability. Let's talk about the phrase, off the record. It means something said in private or not for public sharing. For example, off the record, I think the company will announce layoffs soon. Practice this in a whispering tone. It's often used when someone is being cautious. Use it in storytelling to build suspense or confidentiality. A very popular phrase is break the ice, which means to start a conversation in a new or uncomfortable situation. For example, telling a joke helped break the ice at the meeting. This is great for first dates, networking, or meeting new classmates. Practice this by imagining you're at a party where you don't know anyone. Say, I told a funny story to break the ice. When someone reacts without thinking, we say, it was a knee-jerk reaction. For example, she yelled without thinking. It was just a knee-jerk reaction. This phrase is perfect for describing emotional or impulsive behavior. Practice it by recalling a time you or someone else acted too quickly. To describe something happening quickly and without warning, you can use at the drop of a hat. For example, he's ready to travel at the drop of a hat. It means instantly or with no hesitation. Try using it to describe someone who's always spontaneous or ready for adventure. A useful phrase when something happens smoothly is, it went off without a hitch. For instance, the wedding went off without a hitch. It's great for describing success in plans or events. Think of a well-organized event and practice saying, everything went off without a hitch. To describe someone being ignored, you can say, he got the cold shoulder. For example, after the argument, she gave him the cold shoulder. Practice this phrase with a sentence like, I tried to talk to him, but he gave me the cold shoulder all week. Sometimes people make decisions too quickly. A phrase for that is, he jumped to conclusions. For instance, he saw the message and jumped to conclusions about it. Practice using this phrase to describe misunderstandings or snap judgments. Lastly, for this part, when someone is very committed or loyal to an idea or plan, we say, he's in it for the long haul. For example, this isn't just a phase. She's in it for the long haul. Practice this phrase by connecting it to your own goals or projects. Sometimes when something is confusing or mysterious, we use the phrase, it doesn't add up. For example, he says he was home all night, but the neighbors saw him leave. The story just doesn't add up. This phrase is useful when you're pointing out that something seems suspicious or doesn't make sense. Practice this by thinking of a time when someone's explanation didn't make sense and say, something about it just doesn't add up. When a task or situation becomes too difficult to handle, you can say, it's more than I bargained for. For instance, I thought the class would be easy, but it's way more than I bargained for. This phrase is great when expectations don't match reality. Try describing a project or experience that surprised you in its difficulty. Let's look at how to express curiosity. When you want to know more, you can say, I'm dying to know. For example, you met her? I'm dying to know how it went. This is a very natural and energetic way to express interest. Practice this by thinking of a situation where you wanted the full story from someone. When someone is completely focused, we can say, he's got tunnel vision. That means he's only seeing one thing and ignoring everything else. For example, she's so focused on winning that she has tunnel vision. It can be both positive and negative. Try using it to describe someone who gets lost in their work or goals. To say someone is constantly changing their mind or being inconsistent, try the phrase, he's all over the place. For example, 1 minute he wants to quit, the next he's planning his promotion. He's all over the place. This phrase is helpful when describing unstable or confused behavior. Practice saying it when talking about decision making. When you're in a very difficult situation, you might say, I'm between a rock and a hard place. It means both options are bad or uncomfortable. For instance, if I tell the truth, I hurt her. If I lie, I feel guilty. I am really between a rock and a hard place. Practice this by describing a tough decision you faced in the past. We often say that ship has sailed to mean that it's too late to do something. For example, I was thinking of applying to that school, but the deadline passed. That ship has sailed. Try this phrase when talking about missed opportunities or things you wish you had done. Another great phrase is, let's not reinvent the wheel. This means don't waste time trying to create something that already exists. For example, there's already a system in place. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Practice using this phrase in work or school settings when planning something with a team. If someone becomes successful very quickly, we might say, he rose to fame overnight. For example, she posted one video and rose to fame overnight. This phrase is great when discussing celebrities, influencers, or viral trends. Try describing a success story using this phrase to add excitement to your storytelling. Sometimes when someone leaves quickly or suddenly disappears, we say, he vanished into thin air. For example, he said he'd be right back, then vanished into thin air. It adds a little drama and mystery. Practice saying this with a surprised or confused tone. When someone takes credit for someone else's work, a strong phrase to use is, he stole my thunder. For example, I planned the whole presentation, but he stole my thunder during the meeting. Try describing a situation where someone took credit or attention unfairly. Now let's look at the phrase, throw someone under the bus. It means to betray someone or make them look bad to protect yourself. For instance, when the boss asked who made the mistake, he threw me under the bus. Practice using this phrase by describing an unfair situation. If something becomes suddenly popular, we say, it's caught on like wildfire. For example, that dance trend caught on like wildfire. This is great when describing viral content or new fashion styles. Practice this by talking about something recent that everyone around you started doing. To say that someone is pretending to be someone they're not, we use he's wearing a mask or he's putting on a front. These are powerful ways to talk about fake behavior. Example, she's always smiling, but I think she's putting on a front. Practice this phrase with examples about social or emotional situations. A very common phrase is hit the nail on the head, which means someone said or did something exactly right. For example, when she said we're all tired from overwork, she really hit the nail on the head. It's perfect for discussions and meetings. Practice this by agreeing with someone and saying, you hit the nail on the head with that point. We also say, put yourself in someone else's shoes when talking about empathy. For instance, try to put yourself in her shoes. She's under a lot of stress. It's great for understanding others better. Practice this by imagining a difficult experience someone else is going through and expressing it using this phrase. If someone says something carelessly or without thinking, we can say, "He spoke out of turn." For example, "I didn't mean to interrupt. I think I spoke out of turn." Try this phrase when practicing polite and respectful corrections. Sometimes when someone reveals something unexpectedly, we say, "He let it slip." For example, "He let it slip that she's leaving the company." This phrase is useful for describing accidental or surprising reveals. Practice saying it with surprise or curiosity. To describe someone being ignored, you can say, "He got the cold shoulder." For example, after the argument, she gave him the cold shoulder. Practice this phrase with a sentence like, "I tried to talk to him, but he gave me the cold shoulder all week." Sometimes people make decisions too quickly. A phrase for that is, "He jumped to conclusions." For instance, "He saw the message and jumped to conclusions about it." Practice using this phrase to describe misunderstandings or snap judgments. Lastly, for this part, when someone is very committed or loyal to an idea or plan, we say, "He's in it for the long haul." For example, "This isn't just a phase, she's in it for the long haul." Practice this phrase by connecting it to your own goals or projects. Sometimes when something is confusing or mysterious, we use the phrase, "It doesn't add up." For example, "He says he was home all night, but the neighbors saw him leave. The story just doesn't add up." This phrase is useful when you're pointing out that something seems suspicious or doesn't make sense. Practice this by thinking of a time when someone's explanation didn't make sense and say, "Something about it just doesn't add up." When a task or situation becomes too difficult to handle, you can say, "It's more than I bargained for." For instance, "I thought the class would be easy, but it's way more than I bargained for." This phrase is great when expectations don't match reality. Try describing a project or experience that surprised you in its difficulty. Let's look at how to express curiosity. When you want to know more, you can say, "I'm dying to know." For example, "You met her? I'm dying to know how it went." This is a very natural and energetic way to express interest. Practice this by thinking of a situation where you wanted the full story from someone. When someone is completely focused, we can say, "He's got tunnel vision." That means he's only seeing one thing and ignoring everything else. For example, "She's so focused on winning that she has tunnel vision." It can be both positive and negative. Try using it to describe someone who gets lost in their work or goals. To say someone is constantly changing their mind or being inconsistent, try the phrase, "He's all over the place." For example, one minute he wants to quit, the next he's planning his promotion. He's all over the place. This phrase is helpful when describing unstable or confused behavior. Practice saying it when talking about decision-making. When you're in a very difficult situation, you might say, "I'm between a rock and a hard place." It means both options are bad or uncomfortable. For instance, if I tell the truth, I hurt her. If I lie, I feel guilty. I'm really between a rock and a hard place. Practice this by describing a tough decision you faced in the past. We often say, "That ship has sailed," to mean that it's too late to do something. For example, "I was thinking of applying to that school, but the deadline passed." That ship has sailed. Try this phrase when talking about missed opportunities or things you wish you had done. Another great phrase is, let's not reinvent the wheel. This means don't waste time trying to create something that already exists. For example, there's already a system in place. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Practice using this phrase in work or school settings when planning something with a team. If someone becomes successful very quickly, we might say, he rose to fame overnight. For example, she posted one video and rose to fame overnight. This phrase is great when discussing celebrities, influencers, or viral trends. Try describing a success story using this phrase to add excitement to your storytelling. Sometimes, when someone leaves quickly or suddenly disappears, we say, he vanished into thin air. For example, he said he'd be right back, then vanished into thin air. It adds a little drama and mystery. Practice saying this with a surprised or confused tone. When someone takes credit for someone else's work, a strong phrase to use is, he stole my thunder. For example, I planned the whole presentation, but he stole my thunder during the meeting. Try describing a situation where someone took credit or attention unfairly. Now let's look at the phrase, throw someone under the bus. It means to betray someone or make them look bad to protect yourself. For instance, when the boss asked who made the mistake, he threw me under the bus. Practice using this phrase by describing an unfair situation. If something becomes suddenly popular, we say, it's caught on like wildfire. For example, that dance trend caught on like wildfire. This is great when describing viral content or new fashion styles. Practice this by talking about something recent that everyone around you started doing. To say that someone is pretending to be someone they're not, we use he's wearing a mask or he's putting on a front. These are powerful ways to talk about fake behavior. Example, she's always smiling, but I think she's putting on a front. Practice this phrase with examples about social or emotional situations. A very common phrase is, hit the nail on the head, which means someone said or did something exactly right. For example, when she said we're all tired from overwork, she really hit the nail on the head. It's perfect for discussions and meetings. Practice this by agreeing with someone and saying, you hit the nail on the head with that point. We also say, put yourself in someone else's shoes when talking about empathy. For instance, try to put yourself in her shoes. She's under a lot of stress. It's great for understanding others better. Practice this by imagining a difficult experience someone else is going through and expressing it using this phrase. If someone says something carelessly or without thinking, we can say, he spoke out of turn. For example, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think I spoke out of turn. Try this phrase when practicing polite and respectful corrections. Sometimes when someone reveals something unexpectedly, we say, he let it slip. For example, he let it slip that she's leaving the company. This phrase is useful for describing accidental or surprising reveals. Practice saying it with surprise or curiosity. If something is very close to happening, we say, it's just around the corner. For instance, the holidays are just around the corner. This phrase is hopeful and exciting. Practice using it to talk about events or goals that are coming up soon. When you want to say someone is in control of their emotions or doesn't get upset easily, try. She keeps her emotions in check. For example, even when people criticize her, she keeps her emotions in check. Practice this phrase in contexts where you want to show maturity and calmness. To describe a difficult truth that someone doesn't want to hear, you can say, "That's a hard pill to swallow." For example, being rejected was a hard pill to swallow, but I learned from it. Practice this by recalling a tough lesson in your own life and using this phrase to describe how you felt. Finally, for this section, we'll end with back to the drawing board, which means starting over after a failure. For example, the first plan didn't work, so it's back to the drawing board. This phrase is often used in creative and problem-solving situations. Try saying it when discussing a project that didn't go as planned. Sometimes, when a person is taking on more responsibility than they can handle, you might say, "He's bitten off more than he can chew." For example, she's trying to work full-time, study, and care for her family. She's definitely bitten off more than she can chew. It's a very expressive phrase to describe being overwhelmed. Practice using it by thinking of a time when you felt overloaded with tasks. To express that something is not your responsibility, you can say, "It's not my cup of tea." Though this phrase is usually used for preferences in certain situations, it shows disinterest or disconnection. For instance, "I tried skiing, but it's not really my cup of tea." Try practicing this by listing a few activities you don't really enjoy and expressing it using this phrase. Another very handy expression is "speak of the devil." It's used when someone you were just talking about shows up. For example, "Hey, we were just talking about you. Speak of the devil." This phrase is fun, casual, and often makes conversations more lively. Practice saying it in a surprised or amused tone when someone walks in unexpectedly. To describe something that's just a temporary solution, you can say, "It's just a Band-Aid fix." For instance, "That quick software patch is just a Band-Aid fix. We need a permanent solution." This phrase is great in work-related or problem-solving contexts. Practice saying it when discussing things that only solve problems on the surface. Now let's look at throw in your 2 cents. This means to share your opinion, even if it's not asked for. For example, "I just want to throw in my 2 cents. I think we should try a different approach." It's polite, humble, and useful in group discussions. Practice using it when giving suggestions in meetings or with friends. If someone is uncertain and hesitant, you might hear the phrase, "sitting on the fence," which we've mentioned before. Another alternative is, "He's torn between two choices." For instance, he's torn between accepting a job abroad and staying close to his family. Practice this phrase when you want to show emotional struggle in making a decision. When you don't want to deal with something now, you can say, "I'll cross that bridge when I come to it." It means you'll deal with the problem later when it actually happens. For example, what if the project fails? "I'll cross that bridge when I come to it." Try saying this out loud when someone brings up a possible issue and you want to stay calm. For situations where someone is making a situation worse, we say, "He's adding fuel to the fire." For instance, instead of calming things down, his rude comment just added fuel to the fire. This phrase is excellent when talking about arguments or conflict. Practice saying this when describing how tension escalated in a conversation. Another useful phrase is "keep it under your hat." This means to keep something secret. For example, "Don't tell anyone yet, we're still finalizing the deal." Keep it under your hat. It's a more old-fashioned phrase, but still commonly used. Try practicing it in a whispering or serious tone to get the feeling right. When someone is at the beginning stage of learning something, you can say, "He's still wet behind the ears." For example, "He just started in this field. He's still wet behind the ears." It's often used for people new to a job or environment. Practice using this phrase when describing someone inexperienced. To describe someone who is pretending not to notice something, you might say, "He turned a blind eye." For example, the manager turned a blind eye to the employee's bad behavior. This phrase is useful in professional or ethical discussions. Practice it by thinking of a situation where someone ignored a problem on purpose. If someone keeps trying, even after many failures, we can say, "He's not a quitter," or "She keeps getting back on the horse." The second one is very visual, falling off and getting back on. Example, even after 3 failed businesses, he just got back on the horse. Use this phrase when describing resilience and persistence. Sometimes you want to tell someone to stop talking or avoid saying too much. A polite way is to say, "Let's not go there," meaning avoid that topic. For example, "How did your date go?" "Let's not go there." Practice saying this gently when you want to avoid sensitive or awkward topics. To encourage someone to take a risk, we say, "Take the plunge." For instance, "He finally took the plunge and proposed." It means doing something significant, often involving fear or hesitation. Practice using this when encouraging someone to take action. We also use "break the bank" to describe something very expensive. For example, "That car looks nice, but it'll break the bank." This is perfect for budgeting and financial conversations. Practice using this by describing something you want but can't afford. If something is really easy to do, you might hear, "It's a walk in the park." For example, "Compared to last year's exam, this one was a walk in the park." Practice describing a task that turned out easier than expected using this phrase. A humorous expression to say someone is crazy is, "He's off his rocker." It's very informal and should be used carefully. For example, "He wants to live in a treehouse? He's off his rocker." Practice saying it in a playful or lighthearted way when talking about eccentric ideas. When someone is very eager and excited, we say, "He's chomping at the bit." For instance, "The kids were chomping at the bit to open their gifts." It's often used when someone is impatient in a positive way. Practice this by thinking of something exciting coming up and how eager you feel about it. Let's wrap things up with "pull yourself together." This means to calm down and regain control, especially in stressful moments. For example, you need to pull yourself together before the interview. Practice this with a serious tone and imagine you're giving supportive advice to a friend. And finally, we end this journey through 177 advanced English phrases by reminding ourselves that practice is everything. Learning phrases is only helpful if you actually use them in real conversations. Don't worry about being perfect. Focus on sounding natural, being clear, and improving a little every day. Try choosing 5 to 10 of your favorite phrases from today's lesson, and write a short story or dialogue using them. Speak them out loud. Use them with friends. The more you use these expressions, the more they'll become part of your everyday English. Thank you for spending this time learning with me. Keep speaking. Keep practicing. and keep building your confidence one phrase at a time. I'm Mia, and I'll see you in the next session.